Hi friends! Today I will tell you how I went from stressing about writing one single sentence in Japanese to now writing a longer text or essay every week, so that you can do the same, hopefully. The first reason why I started writing in Japanese was because I wanted to get better at using certain grammar points I wasn't really exposed to naturally when doing immersion and stuff, and I wasn't really able to remember a lot of what I've learned, so I definitely wanted to have a new method to study. And also my speaking ability was quite bad. So I also hope that by increasing my output activities, for example through writing, that also my speaking will get better, because if I am faster at formulating sentences in my head for when I'm writing, I will in turn also get better with formulating sentences for when I'm speaking. And I also hoped for developing a Japanese brain, so basically not translating from German or English into Japanese before speaking or before writing, but just thinking in Japanese from the start. So I hoped this would also be like a benefit I would experience. I got started with writing in Japanese through doing the Genki exercises from the Genki 1 and 2 books, because in those books there were quite a lot of exercises where you had to write sentences. Sometimes you had like words or sentence parts already written, and then you either had to make up a sentence from those words or continue the sentence. So it was a really low pressure way with starting out to write. And there were also exercises where you had to write freely. For those exercises there weren't any corrections. I could check if I was right or not, and I studied with the Genki books by myself most of the time. I wanted to avoid making mistakes, which was not the best idea, but yeah, we will get to this later. And around the time I completed the Genki 2 book, I also started with my Japanese journal. So I tried to write one sentence each day for, I think, 5 or 6 months probably before the JLPT. And let me tell you, I was struggling quite a bit with coming up with sentences on my own, and especially with incorporating the grammar patterns I wanted to practice, especially because the Genki books always supported me with coming up with sentences. It was a bit overwhelming and I barely scratched like the upper and fore level, but I got through it, and it definitely helped me to lose the fear of writing in Japanese, at least for 1 or 2 sentences at a time. So to make it easier for you, I will tell you what I struggled with exactly and how I would go about it now, like with the experience I had with writing Japanese. So the first thing I struggled with was not knowing what to write about. And one thing I would do to like avoid it is to have a running list of like topics that would come into my mind throughout the day or at the time when I was writing, because sometimes I wrote about like, I don't know, the weather, and then I was thinking about, oh, the weather in Japan was really nice when I traveled there or something, and then I would write down weather in Japan, so that when I wasn't really sure what to write about, I could look at my list and then see, oh yeah, I wanted to write about the weather in Japan one day, and just choose this topic. And I would also keep like a running list of questions. So for example, what was the best thing that happened to you today? What are you looking forward for tomorrow? What did you do on the weekend? Like really general questions that you can answer a couple of times without like repeating the same answer again and again. And this also helps me right now with coming up with like new topics and things to write about. The second thing I struggled with when writing the daily sentences was to know which grammar points to use. As I told you, I wanted to use the grammar points that I learned, but I think we all know the problem of sitting there and thinking about, okay, which grammar point did I learn recently? And then there's nothing coming into your brain and you're like, I don't know. So I also struggled with that, and I would now, or I actually have now, a running list of grammar points I recently studied, and then when I will write something, I will open this list and see, okay, which grammar points did I study recently, pick 1 or 2, and then use them in my writing. But before that, I didn't have such a list, and I was honestly a little bit too lazy to just flip through my folder, like with all the exercises, and search for the the grammar points. So such a list would have made it easier back then as well. I was also really afraid of making mistakes, and this is not something to be afraid of, because now I realized that making mistakes is a really good thing, because if I give my italki teacher my text that I wrote and she will correct it for me and then explain to me what is exactly wrong about maybe the word I used or the grammar point, like why I used it in the wrong way, it sticks way better in my brain than not having made the mistake at all and never used the grammar point I was unsure about. So I would definitely encourage you to make mistakes, but of course then have someone that will correct your writing and tell you why it's wrong. Another thing that was quite hard was to get my text corrected, because back then when I was just writing like the 1 or 2 sentences, I think I didn't have an italki teacher yet. So I would put them on HelloTalk to get corrections from natives that way. And sometimes it was really fast and I got corrections within like a couple of minutes. And sometimes it also took a week. So it was like hit or miss. And sometimes I would get the correction a couple days after I've wrote the original sentence. And then I didn't really feel like correcting the sentence because it didn't feel like relevant anymore, kind of. So now I always give the things I write to my italki teacher and then she will correct it for me, and I know when I can expect the corrections, and I will then the next day or the day after correct it again, like in my notes, and write everything down she explained to me during our lesson. And of course, over the time my writing practice evolved, and after getting used to writing 1 or 2 sentences a day, I also started writing longer texts. With longer texts, I mean like 5 or 10 sentences, kind of. So still quite short, but way longer than I was used to. And I was still afraid, but it didn't feel as bad anymore. And something that also helped me was when I did my Anki cards in the morning. Then I would sometimes take note of words or grammar points I reviewed and that I wanted to use in the texts I would write later in the day. And that helped quite a bit because I had at least a couple of things that were already decided beforehand. And I continued with this writing practice until like 2 months ago approximately, because I will be in Japan from October on and visit language school for half a year. And I felt like I definitely have to improve my output ability drastically, because I still feel like I would get very lost when having to speak Japanese to like a barista. So with people that I don't really know and that aren't speaking as clearly and slowly as my italki teacher. So I decided to do my italki lessons, which I did only bi-weekly, and then I also decided to like extend the length from 30 to 45 minutes. And my plan for the extra 15 minutes was to go over the texts I would write earlier in the week and discuss it with my italki tutor. So I started writing the little essays on a weekly basis, and I always try to decide on the topic beforehand when I'm planning my study week, so that I already took the first hurdle that might stand in the way of writing like the longer text. And of course now I have a running list with topics, so it's way easier to decide on what to write about. And at the moment I'm in week 7, I think, of my writing practice, and it definitely improved my writing ability, and I definitely feel way more confident in writing. I don't fear it anymore because I know I will get through writing a longer paragraph within an hour. And because I want to help you to improve your writing as well, I will explain step by step how I go about writing my longer texts. So as I said before, the first thing I will do is when I plan my week to determine which topic I want to write about. And sometimes a new thing will come into my head, maybe something that happened recently or a topic that I kind of want to discuss with my tutor, but I know it would be very hard to speak about because I don't know a lot of the vocabulary and stuff, so I would have to look up quite a few words, or I will just pick a random topic from the topic list that I'm keeping. And then when I sit down to write the text, I will of course look at my grammar list from my Gogo Nihon course and see which grammar point I would want to use like in the first part of the text, for example. And this also gives me sometimes a point where I can just start out with, because I will include this grammar point in the first 1 or 2 sentences, and then I can build from there. And to be honest, I don't really plan what I want to write about beforehand a lot, so I don't write any bullet points down or something. Instead, I take the stream of consciousness approach, kind of. So I will just write down what comes to my mind and try to include grammar points here and there. And then afterwards, I will check if something sounds weird and maybe switch it up or use another grammar point. But the first goal is to have like the rough draft or outline of the text and to not stop and try to perfect everything in the first go, because I feel like this makes it way harder to progress with your text. And if I need to look up words, I will either use Wadoku, which is a website where you can translate words from Japanese to German and German to Japanese, or I will use Jisho, where you can translate English to Japanese or Japanese to English, so it depends on where my brain is at the moment. I also often ask myself what my dreams or hopes are regarding this topic or my feelings, so that I have more things to write about. But sometimes I do feel stuck, and even though I only written like 5 or 6 sentences, I don't know anything else I could add. And then I usually ask ChatGPT for advice. I will usually explain what I'm writing about, so the topic, and then ask for questions or bullet points for inspiration. It comes up with quite a lot of ideas, at least like from my experience, and I had plenty to write about afterwards, so it helped quite a lot. After finishing the first draft, I will proofread it, and then I will try to like correct maybe the sentence order, or if I feel like a word doesn't really fit or I made typos, I will correct it then. And then the bigger correction begins, and this may sound a bit excessive, but it's my way of doing it, because I will then put in the text into DeepL. I will let it translate from Japanese into German, because German is my mother tongue, and then I will read the German text it translated to and see if there's anything that sounds weird, because then I realize sometimes maybe I should switch up those sentences, or maybe it sounds a bit choppy, maybe I should use a conjunction here within those 2 sentences, or it's way too long, maybe I should split the sentence, like minor details kind of. And then afterwards I will put it into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to correct text for me. And I also ask it to make the corrections in bold, so that it's easier for me to see what got corrected in the end. And then afterwards I will let my italki teacher correct it. And because I did like the steps beforehand, it's mostly only particles that we correct, or sometimes it's also like the choice of words. For example, josei would be better than onanuhito or something. And doing the steps before, so correcting the text as far as I can myself, saves definitely a lot of time doing my italki lessons, so I don't have to waste paid time. And it also helps me to realize before what I did wrong and like learn from my own mistakes myself, and not to rely on somebody else to correct my texts for me. But I have to say, even though ChatGPT corrects like half of my mistakes, the other half it doesn't detect, so I wouldn't rely only on ChatGPT for corrections. And then after I received the corrected version from my italki teacher, I will write everything down by hand into my essay book, kind of. And this may also seem a bit unnecessary, but it definitely helps me practicing my handwriting, which I will definitely need when attending language school, because there I will probably have to write a lot of things by hand, and knowing how to write kanji by hand is very essential, I guess, for attending language school, so we will see if that's actually true, but it helps me with my handwriting at least. And then I will mark the words I didn't know or that are new in blue. I will mark the words that I forgot in and lilac, and I will mark the expressions or words I got wrong in pink. And then I will make little word lists, like with the new words, with the words I've forgotten, and I will also make a list with the things I got wrong. And this is the most important part for like this whole process for me, because then I will try to explain to myself or use the explanations my Italki teacher gave me why things I wrote are wrong and why it's better to write them in a different way. And this helps me going forward with writing new texts and then hopefully not making the same mistakes again. And sometimes it can be a bit hard, like to remember everything from the earlier texts, but I don't beat myself up if I make the same mistake like a couple times in a row, it's okay. But I will get there, and I definitely improved when it comes to particles, so I'm not mad about that. And when it comes to future aspirations for my writing practice, I hope to be able to take on the daily sentences again when I'm in language school, because then I will probably have to study a lot of new grammar points each day, and using the writing practice to relate those grammar points to topics in my life might be a good way to get them into my head faster. And of course, I still hope that my writing practice will translate into better and faster speaking abilities when it comes to Japanese. And it definitely did help me, as I told you before, but of course there's always improvement. So yeah, that's my experience with writing in Japanese so far, everything I've learned so far. If you have any other thing that I didn't talk about or something that you find very helpful when writing in Japanese, please let me know in the comments below. I'm really interested to hear tips from you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you've liked it, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video very soon. Bye bye!